When I initially spotted her through the kitchen window, I assumed she was simply another white form in the snowbank, motionless and crouched close to the curb, but something pertaining to her placement caught my attention. It seemed odd and too purposeful. Nevertheless, I stepped and put on my spectacles. I noticed it as it got closer to the glass. 5 or 6 German Shepherd puppies months old, tightly curled up on the bench. Her body was nestled inside a bus stop. The school backpack was opened and unzipped just sufficient to accommodate her, as if someone had left her there after packing her away. The frozen concrete has straps hanging from it. Her eyes and nose were hardly visible. Those wide-open eyes were fixed on the road, as though she was anticipating someone's arrival. Return and unzip the remainder of her, it was 10 degrees outside. And there was snow falling. On the side, the type of day when Shutter's eye opened the main door to the entire town. I went outside, where the chill struck me like. I took a slap, but I continued to walk in my boots, shattered the ice as I made my she. Noticed me across the street, but didn't roar, didn't even run blink. Simply sat there, half hidden and frozen, shaking like a leaf in that backpack. I squatted carefully because I was too exhausted to fall. Hands, quiet voice, low volume. "Hey girl," I said. "What are you doing out here?" I noticed her when I reached closer. Only the tips of their paws are raw and red. She must have been out there in the cold. I looked about for hours, maybe even longer. Not a single footprint. No tire tracks, no automobiles, no just her in the wind. The child is running late. A folded note was nestled within one. I placed it into one of the backpack's side pockets, our cold fingers, and unfurled it, using youngster's handwriting was crooked. Sally is her name. I apologize for having to kindly be considerate. She's okay. Just that name, no number, and that's when I realized she wasn't abandoned by. She was positioned as though someone had took her there and tucked her in. He left after making a vow. Sally, however, had not moved and was still waiting for someone. Who was unable to attend. I'm George Harris, and I'm 63. I was the school bus driver that stopped there each morning. But she is unlike anything I have ever seen. In not all of my journeys, but not all of my years. Initially unsure of what to do, she was just sitting there, not weeping or barking. Their shallow, anxious breathing pulses as frequently as she anticipated. Listen. To the footsteps returning. A tiny form in an overly large world zipped into a notebook-specific bag, and I reached ahead with pencils. Not lives. Slower this time as well, and I slipped my. She stiffened her hands beneath her, but didn't withstand a slight, uncontrollable shudder. I removed the entire pack from the bench. She held it close to my chest and was lighter than she ought to have been. I trudged through the snow to get her home, taking the backpack one cautious step at a time. My body is crushed against my coat. In order to protect her from the wind, I set her in the den beside the radiator. The room was still warm and had a little scent of the candles, wood smoke, and cinnamon in the cold. I lit every night. I completely unzipped the pack and allowed her to crawl out by herself, but she didn't. Owen Rear immediately remained partially inside, observing me, so I took a seat on the ground. A short distance away and waited for 10 minutes went by, then 15, and eventually, she tentatively stepped out with one paw, trembling. Every action as though she wasn't certain she had authorization to be in a location such as this. Sniffed at the baseboard and the floor. Her nose briefly touched my boot before swiftly I noticed the tag on it when I pulled back. There wasn't much on her collar. One side of the aluminum bone was dented, but she liked the message. The name was inscribed there. Sally said. I softly spoke it aloud. Hey, out. Sally? Her ears twitched. I tried again. You're safe now, Sally, since she didn't show up. Closer. But she also didn't back down. Simply lay down there on the with her, hardwood folded into herself. I stood up and went to put my nose between her paws. Can of the only dog was opened in the kitchen. Food I still had left over from a stray eye. I didn't know whether she would eat, so I just put the dish a few feet away and gave it a little heat and warm water last year. She observed me the entire 10 minutes. After a few minutes, she stood rigid and with weak legs, back one cautious step at a time, and she then began eating little morsels like. She didn't think it would endure as long as all she had ever known had been momentary. After she was done, she walked curled up and went back to the backpack. I swear to God that she, to that chilly nylon covering over the plush eye, had spread a towel over the warmth of the house above the opportunity to relocate, ahead, since that's where she was last seen. Whoever he was who wrote it, he saw him, the person who crammed her in like a lunchbox and left in a heartbreaking manner. She wasn't just holding every step, smelling anything, she was clinging to a pledge that someone would return, that perhaps all of this was an error, and the Sales realized then that I couldn't allow her to keep. That night, I was unable to wait alone. Every time I closed my eyes to go to sleep, I saw. She curled up in that backpack as though it were. Her eyes were all that remained of her body. Open, observing. The door as though she hadn't have faith in the calm, yet as she knew, basically, how it sounded before someone departed permanently. I left the den light on, left the door open every now and then. I'd get up and peep around the frame. She hadn't moved, still within that bag, still, snuggled into her anguish like it was armor. When morning came, I brewed coffee and warmed another bowl. Of food, she waited, until I backed away and then ate in silence, then went back to her house as if it were instinct, as though she had been taught not to hope. But I made an attempt that morning. Distinct, I slowly pulled the backpack. Not close enough to the fire, toskered her close enough to accept the edge off the cold before I took a seat in my relax, as I did when my daughter was somewhat similar to, and read out from the newspaper weather, local news, and stupid tiny. She heard objects that didn't move. Blink. But she listened, and it became a pattern every morning, which is what I'm in coffee in my chair and give her that backpack like a time capsule listening. Breathe, staying on the 4th day. I walked downstairs to discover her not in the backpack. She was by the window sitting remains as ever, peering out toward the street in the direction of the bus stop. My chest tightened. I recognized that waiting expression, that kind of loyalty that outlasts rationality. When I was still driving the school bus, I used to observe it in children when they waited for faces illuminated by porches at mailboxes. I hoped that someone might wave today. Back, that perhaps someone would this time. Recall that Sally had the same expression, remained still beside the window all day. Didn't recoil when I delivered food since. The sound of footsteps was simply observed, and now the yellow bus. Arrived around 3:17 p.m. Empty this at the stop across the street. Time. As the school was still closed. Her ears elevated her body from the storm, waited with a slight forward lean. She remained motionless as the bus departed, remained there as if her clock was set, solely to that precise time. I sat next to her that night on the floor isn't close enough, but it's close enough. Understand who he was. But if he could, I said, he would know you never gave up if he saw you now. She didn't look up at him, but I observed it blinking slowly and heavily like the world's weight has just changed. Half an inch, as well as the initial. Since arriving, she has rested her head on not within the backpack, but rather on the floor, my foot barely making contact, yet sufficient to state, I am aware that you're here. And I pondered, perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to think that I wasn't. I didn't go anywhere the following morning, failed to locate her in the backpack. I discovered her near the window, or in the curled up on the old rug in the hallway, just its still silent outside my bedroom door. I stood there, wary but closer. One socked foot in the entryway. I didn't say it, but my heart was in my throat. Anything. Simply go on your knees slowly, and said in a whisper, Hey, Sally. She raised her ears. No hurry, no wag, but she blinked, and she remained. That was all I required. Prepared oatmeal with a small amount of scrambled egg. She waited for her until I turned my padded into the kitchen paws back then, slowly clicking as, if she was scared too, heard that she always ate slowly, completing the bowl as she had anticipated, to vanish at any moment by midday. I brought her back to sit by the fire. Blanket, an old flannel one this time, I kept in the truck for extended periods of time shifts. I placed it next to the fire, gazed at me, then went away. Sat at my feet and went straight past it without curled. Up and rested rather than slept. Putting my chin on my boot, I saw the flames. I had the message from the rucksack with me that evening when I sat at the table, and after reading it numerous times, the wrinkles were I'm crying, and her name is Sally. I apologize. Please be understanding. She is doing well. I continued to try, to see the hands that composed it with a little trepidation. Perhaps 10 or 11. Trembling hands that were years old but still knotted in the hands of the backpack, that most likely gave her a final hug and, "Wait here. I'll be back," she murmured. Even though they were aware that it was untrue, I began calling shelters in order to. I used to know drivers at schools. Teachers didn't say anything about lunch ladies, simply inquired, "Do you know of a child who just vanished? Someone who might? Have you ever owned a dog?" The majority of folks brushed me off, but I received a call from a woman named Linda, front desk employee at one of the elementary schools close to the town's edge. "We had a boy, Caleb, 11, she said, vanished shortly prior to the storm that he'd been, residing with family members following some. When things went wrong with his mother, there were domestic reports, but no evidence, then he simply disappeared." I inquired, "Did he own a canine companion?" After a long silence, "Yeah, a brand new German. Shepherd puppy said it was the last positive thing he had." "Why?" I glanced at Sally, who was now sleeping on slowly. Her side chest rose and fell, and I spoke softly into the phone due to Linda. She waited for him constantly. I sat as she made some calls. My hand was there for a very long time, leaning on her side, contemplating a lad with an excessive amount of burdens and a dog that still carried them all for him, still holding out hope that the snow will stop. For the first time in a long time, the next morning, the sun broke through the clouds this week, faint and delicate, as if it didn't want to startle anyone. Sally was already at the window. As I walked downstairs, sitting, I waited. Not tense anymore, just constant, as if part of her continued to think that today could be the. I stood behind her that day, holding her mug. With her nothing, she watched the street. Yet, she didn't turn, but her, I said. The slightest twitch came from the tail. Linda told me over the phone an hour later that they'd followed Caleb through a nearby system of shelters. Thank God, he was safe. Not far away from a foster family presently, she informed me that he was doing 2 towns over. All okay, given that, but he kept asking. Regarding his puppy, they weren't certain, Sally. What should I say to him? I sat down. Do you think I can handle the thudding in my chest? A meeting with the foster family. She promised to try, but it could take. I hung up and turned to face Sally, remained seated, and continued to observe. The bus used to stop in that vacant area, pause where nothing had shown up for days. He approached her and sat down next to her slowly, my hand on her back, saying, "I believe I've him." I muttered, "I believe he's all right." She didn't blink or move, but her body shifted under my hand, just a little bit, as if she heard me. Thought that the days that followed, where I kept calling and gently pressing, blur. They ultimately decided on a meeting under supervision. There is no assurance that the foster family had initially been wary, but as they presented Caleb with the picture I had taken of, he sobbed as he was by the fire. Sally remarked, "That's my mother." Girl. We decided to schedule it for Saturday. I tried not to show up for what seemed like forever. Something different. She made an effort to maintain it. Nevertheless, the food, the fire, and the method in the morning, I read aloud, but Sally, she halted when she realized something had changed, beginning to sleep in the backpack. Instead, spend the night sleeping near the door. I sat with her before the visit I softly brushed my hand over her fur on the floor. "She's going to see him again," I replied, murmured, then softer. "Although I'm not sure if she returns, it will hit me more deeply, more than I anticipated, as I had grown accustomed to Toto her paw sounds, to the manner in which she leaned in close. To me, without requesting how she occupied the silences. I didn't recognize us, but I was aware it wasn't about me. This concerned A boy, a goodbye that never felt right with a girl. In case Saturday morning turned chilly, I put the backpack by the front door after folding it up and brushing it off. Radiant, the type of cold that creates, everything remained motionless, even the wind. I woke up early to feed. Sally brushed the remaining snow from the porch, She didn't eat much because she was aware that approaching. Her eyes continued to dart to the door to my backpack, which I had spread out on the bench wasn't merely a thing to her. It was her final message to him, and, well, left early because the drive was barely 40 minutes. However, I felt as though I carried the weight of the world with me. Sally, wrapped in a blanket and lying down in her head, almost touched the passenger seat. Above the window eye's edge, she didn't watch the trees pass past. Her ears trembled, but she didn't move much, remained vigilant and engaged as we drew into Thetney Residential Street where the A woman was waiting at the foster home. She was wrapped in a heavy crimson coat outside, waved me in with a courteous grin, she said. He's inside, and her name was Aaron. He hasn't been this quiet all week. After parking the truck, the door was opened. Sally jumped down on her own, slowly. Without hesitation, she glanced at the leash, home, then at me, and I muttered, "Go, he's in there, girl, go on." She didn't. She ran, moving slowly across Thesey Yard with a low, quivering tail as though pursuing an aroma that predates the season. While holding the door open, Aaron. When everything slowed, I took a step soon as Sally turned the bend. Inside, he entered the living room and was there. Caleb is 11 years old and has small freckles, out sweatshirt and eyes that seem to. He stood motionless, mature for his age. With a single gentle phrase, his lips opened. Sally's body cracked, and her ears went limp, moved forward, and then it seemed as though someone had flicked a switch and hurled herself across. The Caleb fell to his knees on the floor and stopped her in mid-leap, and instead of barking, she didn't complain, but she trembled she buried her face in each breath, crushed on his chest as though she could squish into him as she had, keeping her heartbeat steady throughout time. And now Caleb's was at last free. Arms encircled her tightly in desperation. "I'm sorry," he repeatedly said. And once more, "I apologize. I didn't want to leave you, but I had tolicked his neck, hands, and face, everywhere before simply leaning into, almost no distance at all between them. Everything, I waited outside the doorway and kept still, and didn't blink for a long time. Since I had never witnessed a reunion that needed only a touch, no words, something's presence and sound, I'm finally home. So they let me remain. I sat for a little longer than I had anticipated, perched on their couch's edge as Sally curled up on the floor next to Caleb, head curled up in his lap as though it had never stopped and never left his fingertips, brushing through her hairs while moving scratching behind her ears, stopping only long enough time to dab at his eyes before returning often, as if he lets her go, she might vanish. Aaron brought us tea, but she said very little, sat close by, observing with a gentle of pain on her face, as if she had witnessed several failed reunions that never happened, complete circle. But this particular one was distinct. She discussed him in her rest. I said, and Aaron gave me a quick look. Dream, you can tell the pause because I nodded. Modify her breath, but she never didn't make any noise until I informed her that he was. Caleb checked to see if she had waited. They didn't want to lie the entire time, so she didn't back down from telling him the truth. That location daily, same bench, same direction, even after the buses halted running despite the snow falling, so difficult to see across the street. I left her as he looked down and chewed his lip, so I believed it would be safer for him to. They murmured in a whisper that we had to go. At that moment, my uncle was returning. I didn't bring her because I knew I couldn't. Wishes to have her listen to his voice. I told her to wait since I broke in the end, vowed to locate her. Sally moved around in his lap as though she comprehended each and every "you did," I said. And she did too. The silence returned. But it was full, not heavy, like someone had just said something holy. And everyone was still getting caught up to it. Aaron eventually stood up and said, "We should talk," she whispered softly as she gazed at me. Wes stepped out into the chilly porch air. "She cannot stay," she said, biting our faces. "Not yet," she responded. "Caleb's case is still going on with paperwork visits. I thought I said rules, but he can observe her visits on the weekends as long as you're prepared to. I wasn't even required to." Naturally, her shoulders relaxed. He has experienced more than most grown-ups. However, this is the first time I've seen her again. I've watched him breathe like a child once. As I walked back, my eyes were burning, and I nodded. Caleb was dozing off on the rug. Sally. I sat down close to him, pulled the blanket over them both, and stayed. The room grew dark while cuddled up on his chest. When the furnace turned on, that's when, as I watched them sleep, I come to a realization. Not all reunions are between individuals. Sometimes, the past finds a new home. Sometimes it's a vow to move forward, kept quiet, and occasionally it's just a youngster and his canine companion clutching one another, like the outside world can wait a little. Later that evening, I took Sally home. She sat in the passenger seat by herself, still snuggled up in her blanket, eyes stuck to the rear glass for a long time after the behind us. The foster home had vanished. She didn't cry or complain, but the entire body was quieter than normal, such as something had been ingrained in her. I continued to attempt to comprehend it. I only held one hand and didn't say anything, one resting close by and the other on the wheel her paw in case she had to make contact with a cross. That area, and keep in mind she wasn't by themselves when we returned to the home. Instead of going to the knapsack, she did not approach the door. Instead, she immediately entered the den and got up on the couch for the first time in her life, and nestled into the cushion in the corner like. She glanced at me and said it had always been hers. Gaze calm and gentle at first, then she slept, without light. Not careful, real sleep deep. I remained there unguarded for longer than I ought to have only observed her, because I understood that she wasn't waiting. She was now aware of his location and more. Most importantly, she was aware that he was all right. The following weeks passed slowly and quietly. Every Saturday, we took a car to the Ripples. Sally from the foster home would jump out of the vehicle before the engine was even killed, as well as each time Caleb was on the porch. Arms have already begun to open for business. Weren't noisy, didn't bark or tail. They simply sat side by side while chasing. Side like pieces of a puzzle that weren't necessary to move once to fit. Aaron informed me that the next time he stopped biting his nails, he sleeps all night long. Then I received a call a few days prior to the next appointment. They intended to permanently relocate Caleb once more. This time, stable adoption of a new house in, will he still see the process? I asked Sally. A lengthy pause that will be up to. The new family. I ended the call and gazed at the fireplace. Sally was sleeping next to it, her head resting on the backpack that she slept close by, even though she didn't climb inside any longer. Perhaps it was comfort. Perhaps it was a memory, or perhaps she wanted it close simply in case someone attempted to remove that aspect of her. Once more, I approached, knelt, and ran my gauve her fur and explained what I had been waiting weeks. If they don't allow, you'll stay with me if you see him. No matter what, you're not returning to, you hear me, Chili. Then she raised her head and tilted her ears, gently leaned all the way into my chest, and I realized in that quiet that she was, now, not in place of Caleb, but due to him, as love can occasionally, doesn't finish where you expect it to. Sometimes it only develops a little bit sideways. I received the formal call a few days later. The adoption of Caleb had passed through his new family, resided close by 2 hours to the west. Wenatchee is a small, fenced-in school in a peaceful community. They had a rescued cat in their backyard named. There are already 2 children and Juniper in the house. According to Aaron, the match was excellent. They were friendly, steady, and nice. But one worry the Fourier family had was that they weren't certain about getting a dog in particular, one having a historical background. One with that type of bond, one that included her personal narrative. I realized that it was etched deeply into her bones. I did, but I also sensed something. When she said it, I felt a twist inside. Observed Sally dozing off on the rug. She twitched. Her nose in her dream began to identify the noises she produced. I'm sleeping now without panic or fear. However, her heart's tender memory was allowing space at last for items that I inquired if Caleb knew Aaron, and it didn't hurt. No, not yet, he said. That evening, I kept thinking the same thing as I looked at her. How can you tell a dog that her person is gone again, that the boy who wrapped her in a backpack and whispered, "Wait for me," isn't coming back? not because he doesn't want to, but because life doesn't always let love stay. Simple. I didn't sleep much the next morning. I made a decision. We drove out to Washa. Hours of winding roads and snow-glazed fields. Sally was alert the whole time. Head out the window half the trip, like she could smell something familiar in the wind when we pulled up to the house. Caleb was already outside. He saw us. His face lit up like I hadn't seen since their first reunion, but then it dimmed because he knew too. He walked up to the truck and leaned in. Is she staying? I didn't know what to say before I could. Answer. Sally jumped out. No leash, no hesitation. She walked straight to Caleb, rubbed her head against his side, then sat down beside him and waited. Not like previously, not with the pain of someone who had been abandoned, but rather as someone who was still choosing peace. Caleb gave me a glance. His tone was quieter this time. Is she able to visit occasionally? I nodded whenever you asked me to, and he did the same. Back glanced at her before reaching into the pocket of his coat and tugged. Something was missing, but the note remained the same. Sally is her name. I apologize for having to. She's fine, so please be polite. He gave it to him. Carefully, I didn't believe anyone would eventually track her down, so I took the message and you didn't abandon her, so I gently folded it. Said that she waited after you. Saved her, because she was aware that you would smile at Caleb. I saw her tail and thought she was brave. I said, she's thumping once her eyes calm. More than that, we remained at her house. That day, Caleb offered Sally a little Moria look around his new room, which has walls covered in stars that sparkle in the dark, a pile of a picture of dog-eared comic books by the bed, of them pasted and plastered over his desk. And he also showed her the backyard, then made a cautious lap around the barrier, sprinted around the swing set 3 crazy laps, as if her legs had recalled something. Significant joy. On her it appeared different, no longer desperate or frenzied. But whole Caleb, who was light-free, chuckled as she rolled, legs kicking up on her back in the snow-white clouds. That's what she used to do when he said, I first got her, but not after we never once left my mother's house to watch her from the porch. My heart is heavy and hurting all at once. When she recalled, I told her she was simply, we had cocoa because we were waiting for the appropriate moment. Left the type with too many before cups too large for one person, and marshmallows. Sally's hand lay on the carpet at Caleb's head and feet on his toes, as if she were securing him to the ground with his new. Before I left, my parents thanked me, saying, first, they weren't certain, but today, the father saw that she wasn't just a dog, claimed that she is the aspect of him that, luckily, I drove home without arguing, and the roads are slick with frost, bro. Without her, the truck was too quiet, so I kept extending a hand toward the passenger seat prior to realizing that it was empty, that the house felt larger and cooler at night. Remained, on the bench, standing near the backpack, and gazed at it for a while. Considered folding it and putting it away. Putting it in the closet beside the previous, the leash she never used and dog bowls. However, I didn't. Instead, I left it alone, because Sally wouldn't always return, not daily, but on certain weekends, some. There are times during the summer when the past and the present might reappear subtly like in the dark, 2 hands brushing, and when her ears perked. Up as she entered that door. Eyes bright, tail low, I would be present. Have her blanket washed and the fire going. The bowl of food she was eating because of what she provided me with during the quiet weeks of waiting was more than just company. It was, have faith in the type that grows in it was the coldest soil, and it was still growing wild. Proof that even in the worst moments, when the world forgets you, when people walk away, when the bus never comes, love remembers, and sometimes it comes back, around not to stay, but to say, I still see you, I still know you, and I'm still yours. I still keep her photo on the mantle. The one Caleb took that last weekend, the 2 of them in the backyard. Snow falling in thick, soft spirals here, ears tilted just slightly, his hand resting gently on her collar. They're not looking at the camera, they're looking at each other, and in that moment they look whole, like the world didn't break them, like the goodbye wasn't an ending, just a pause between heartbeats. Sometimes I still expect to hear her pause on the floor, those soft little clicks in the hallway late at night. I still glance at the window at 3:17 p.m. Old habits, I guess part of me thinks I always will, but this house isn't empty anymore because Sally left something here, not just her scent in the rug. Not just her fur still caught in the fibers of my jacket. She left Allison a simple one that no gesture of love, no matter. How small, how broken, how uncertain is ever wasted that waits. Waiting is not weakness. That a heart may stay open even after it's been walked away from, and that somewhere out there, someone might still be hoping for a sign, for a miracle, for a moment like hers. If this story touched you, please share it. Not for me, not even for Sally, but for the one still sitting in the cold, still viewing deserted roads, still believing that someone will come back. Because sometimes you are the person they're waiting to join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice, be their hope.